Alrighty, now for our second lesson in the introduction unit, we're looking at the studying individuals part of the definition of psychology. I've got a class set of these mini whiteboards I think are really good for recapping some details and a quick bit of formative assessment. So if you don't have them, you can just get them to write down on paper or just a think, pair, share, but see if they can get the definitions of these terms. And then they hold up, I do them one by one and then they just hold it up. If they're not sure, they put a question mark. And today we're looking at, this guiding question isn't so essential, but we're looking at psychology and how it might differ to other social sciences. But really, it's the reason why that question is there to focus on, we study individual behavior, right? And so that's the focus. And so that's the key difference between those other subjects. So the first part, we're going to get them to brainstorm in their workbooks specific examples of people being violent. They might say things like domestic violence, terrorism, war, things like that. This is just to get violence, just to get them to thinking about real life examples, because then we're going to get them to think, pair, share about basically all these questions related to factors that cause violence, why people are violent, right? Factors within communities, different countries. What are the things that cause violence? And this is the example we're going to look at today with individual behavior. And also this is good because it leads into this first unit, which is criminology. So there is a recurring theme in this introduction unit about violence and studying criminal behavior, because that is going to help them in the first unit if they're studying criminology. And if they're not, it's still interesting stuff. So a bit of chalk and talk here, just giving them some context about a culture of honor and what it is, where it comes from. And then getting into the United States, and the reason for that is they're going to go into a role play. In the workbook, they've got a summary of Cohen's Culture of Honor study, and in a group of 4, they're going to act it out. And then there's a question to answer in the workbook. And the reason for this is to eliminate, to stamp out the use of generalizations. And so we can take in a couple of examples that are in the textbook here. And you can get to think about these two answers and think about which conclusion is more accurate and why. And what we're looking at here is, right, we have to make generalizations because we're studying, we're looking at whole groups of people, but because we're trying to explain individual behavior, we have to realize that there are exceptions, and that's where our language becomes really important. So for example, they might have concluded from that study that Southerners are more violent than Northerners. Well, I mean, that's an oversimplification, it's an overgeneralization. Really, we're saying they're more likely to react to being offended by the Northerners. So they didn't really measure violence, and it's more tendencies, right, and patterns, as opposed to definitive statements. And that's the purpose of this lesson, is to try and get them to think about the language they use and to avoid using overgeneralizations. And then get into a bit of chalk and talk here, right? So we're looking at averages, norms, tendencies, because we're studying groups of people. And we are trying to explain behavior within similar groups of people, but everyone's different, right? And so, we can look at some examples. We share similarities, and then I like to look at an example of anger. Okay, we're all different. Different things make us angry. Some of us are more angry than others, but we all get angry. That's the similarity that we have. So we study groups to try and make conclusions about anger. So we might look at people who have something in common, like people with anger problems, and then try and make a conclusion about why they might have that anger problem. It could be about brain activity, and that's one finding that's been found. But we have to be tentative with that conclusion. We can't say you have an anger problem because of your brain, because, well, not everyone's brain's the same, and a lot of factors affect that. So, it's that balance here that we're looking at between, okay, we're trying to make a generalization because we're looking at a group of people, but we have to allow for the exceptions. It's just to introduce that idea, really. I can explain here the answer to the guiding question, or you can skip it if you don't want to. There's just some comparing this culture of honor, how anthropologists, sociologists, and psychologists might study that same phenomena a little bit differently. I'd recommend they read the lesson in the textbook, and then here's the guiding question that they can answer to think about it. And then we get on to the next lesson. Oh, sorry. I would just remind them that one way they can get ahead is to read before the class. If they it should only be 5 to 15 minutes of reading. 15 minutes is on the very slow end. There's no more than 1,000 words per lesson, which does take anywhere from 5 to 15 minutes for kids to read. So, if they want to get ahead and get a head start and make it easier for them to comprehend the concepts, I would recommend they do that. And then we get into looking at the scientific method in our next lesson. All right.